I worked security near a saltwater pump station because the job paid more than anything else on the board and didn't ask many questions, which, looking back, should have bothered me more than it did. My name's Marcus Webb, I'm 28, and at the time I was bouncing between short contracts, night shifts, isolated facilities, places where the biggest risk was supposed to be boredom. The pump station sat on the edge of a reclaimed coastal zone, a flat stretch of land that used to be marsh before someone decided it would be cheaper to wall the water out than move people inland. The company email called it critical flood infrastructure. The locals just called it the pumps. I arrived just before dusk on my first night, black hoodie zipped up against the wind, dark jeans, steel-toe boots crunching on gravel as I parked near the security office. The station itself was a low concrete complex surrounded by chain-link fencing, floodlights mounted on tall poles casting hard white light over wet ground. Beyond the fence, the land sloped down toward the water, reeds and mud stretching out until they disappeared into a gray horizon. The smell was the first thing I noticed: salt, oil, and that sharp metallic tang you get near old machinery mixed with something organic, something rotting slowly. Inside the security office, a man in his late 40s sat behind a scarred desk, sipping coffee from a thermos that had seen better days. He introduced himself as Keller, day supervisor, and handed me a clipboard without standing up. "Your nights," he said, "6 p.m. to 6 a.m. solo." He ran through the basics quickly: patrol the perimeter every hour, log pump readings, report any equipment alarms. Then he paused, eyes flicking toward the window that faced the water. "One more thing," he said. "Keep an eye on the waterline." I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "It moves." I laughed, thinking he was talking about tides. He didn't laugh back. "Not like it should," he added. He slid a folded sheet of paper across the desk, the same kind of plain list I'd learned to be wary of on other jobs. No logo, no signature, just typed rules. Rule 1: remain inside the fence line after dark. Rule 2: do not attempt to mark or measure the waterline manually. Rule 3: if the water appears closer than during the previous patrol, note the time and return to the office. Rule 4: do not respond to sounds coming from the water. Rule 5: if alarms trigger without a logged surge event, do not investigate alone. I read it twice. "Is this serious?" I asked. Keller met my eyes. "It's policy," he said. "You follow it, you get paid." That was the end of orientation. He left 10 minutes later, headlights fading down the access road, and suddenly the place felt a lot bigger and a lot emptier. Night settled in fast. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of water moving somewhere beyond the pumps, a constant low rush that blended with the hum of machinery. On my first patrol, everything looked normal. The fence was intact, the ground damp but firm, the water line sitting where it belonged beyond a strip of mud and reeds. I logged the time, checked the gauges, and went back inside. Around 9, fog rolled in from the coast, thin at first, then thick enough that the floodlights created glowing halos instead of illumination. The pumps droned steadily, a deep vibration you could feel through your boots when you stood still. By my third patrol, something felt off. The mud beyond the fence looked darker, wetter. The water line hadn't surged dramatically, but it was closer, just a few feet nearer to the fence than it had been an hour earlier. I checked the tide charts pinned to the wall inside. According to them, the water should have been receding. I noted the change in the log like the rules said and told myself not to overthink it. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound from the water, faint but distinct, like something shifting its weight slowly, deliberately, followed by a soft splash. I froze, heart ticking up a notch, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the fence. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by what almost sounded like breathing, wet and patient. Rule 4 echoed in my head: do not respond. I backed away toward the office, not running, just creating distance, every instinct screaming at me to get inside solid walls. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I didn't relax. Every patrol after that, the water was closer. Not rushing, not dramatic, just advancing inch by inch as if the land itself was slowly being claimed back. By dawn, the waterline sat nearly flush with the outer edge of the fence, lapping softly against the mud. When Keller returned in the morning, I showed him the log. He scanned it, jaw tight. "You did right," he said. "We'll keep monitoring." I wanted to ask questions, but something in his expression told me not to push. I went home, slept badly, dreamed of standing still while the ground around me slowly disappeared under dark water. The second night, the pumps alarmed at 11:47 p.m. A shrill electronic wail cut through the hum, lights flashing red in the control room. I checked the system readouts. No surge, no pressure spike, nothing that explained the alarm. Rule 5 told me not to investigate alone, but there was no one else to call. I silenced the alarm and watched the cameras instead. On the monitor that showed the shoreline, I saw the waterline shift again, not gradually this time, but all at once, like a line being redrawn. The image jittered, then stabilized, and the water was several feet closer than it had been seconds before. Something moved just beneath the surface, a long, dark shape gliding parallel to the fence. I leaned closer to the screen, pulse pounding, and that's when I noticed the reflection. In the black water, distorted by ripples, something that looked almost like a face turned upward, as if it knew it was being watched. I shut off the monitor and sat there in the dim office, listening to the pumps, to the water, to my own breathing. The rules weren't about safety drills or liability. They were about managing exposure, about keeping someone like me from doing the one thing every instinct told me to do: go closer, get a better look, understand. As the night wore on, the waterline kept creeping forward, silent and inevitable, and I started to realize the pump station wasn't holding the sea back anymore. It was marking how far it was allowed to come. The second night started the same way the first one had ended, with fog hugging the ground and the pumps humming like they were trying to drown out something much larger than themselves. I arrived a little before 6, black hoodie pulled tight, boots still damp from the drive-in, and Keller was already waiting to hand off the shift. He looked worse than the night before, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched like he'd been chewing on bad news all day. I asked if anyone higher up had looked at the logs. He said yes, too quickly, and told me engineering was aware of the anomaly, which sounded like a phrase designed to end conversations, not explain anything. Before he left, he stopped with his hand on the door and said, "If the waterline jumps again tonight, don't try to make sense of it. Just log it." That was all the warning I got. As soon as his truck disappeared down the access road, the place felt wrong again, like it was holding its breath. I did my first patrol just after sunset, walking the inside of the fence with my flashlight cutting through mist that seemed thicker than it should have been. The ground squelched under my boots closer to the fence now, mud seeping up where it hadn't been yesterday. The water line was there, almost touching the fence in places, dark water rippling softly like it was alive and thinking. I forced myself not to stare too long and went back inside to log it. The pump's vibration felt stronger tonight, less steady, like a heartbeat that couldn't quite find its rhythm. Around 8, the cameras flickered. Not enough to trigger an alert, just a brief distortion that made the shoreline blur and stretch, then snap back into place. When it did, the water was closer again, close enough that I could see small waves licking at the base of the fence posts. The tide charts still said it should have been going out. I checked them 3 times, then logged the change and sat back, hands flat on the desk, breathing slow. That was when the sound started, clearer than the night before. Something moved in the water just beyond the fence, not splashing wildly, not thrashing, but displacing it slowly like a large body adjusting its position. The sound carried a strange intimacy to it, like it was meant to be heard by whoever was closest. I stayed inside, reminding myself of the rules, watching the camera feed instead of the window. On the screen, the waterline crept forward again, not in inches now but in feet, the mud disappearing beneath dark, reflective surface. A shape passed under the water, elongated, too smooth to be debris, its outline visible only where the floodlights caught subtle changes in depth. My chest tightened as it moved parallel to the fence, lingering near the pump intake channels, where the water churned slightly as it was pulled through the system. The pump's hum deepened, straining, and an alarm flickered on one of the auxiliary panels before shutting itself off. No surge logged, no fault code, just that sound and the movement in the water. I picked up the radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button, then stopped. Rule 5. Do not investigate alone. There was no one to investigate with. Around 10, I heard something else, not from the pumps or the water line, but from farther out past the fog, a low, rhythmic sound like someone stepping carefully, testing each footfall. I realized with a cold clarity that the water line wasn't just moving closer to the fence. It was reorganizing the ground beneath it, reshaping the boundary so whatever was out there didn't have to cross as much land to reach me. I stayed in the office the rest of the night, eyes glued to the monitors, logging each change, each jump forward, until the page was full of timestamps and notes that all said the same thing in different ways. Closer, closer, closer. By the time dawn lightened the fog, the water was pressed right up against the fence along most of the perimeter, waves tapping gently against metal like fingers drumming on a door. When Keller came back, he didn't need to read the log to know what had happened. He looked at the water through the window, then at me, and said, "If it does it again tonight, they'll shut the station down." He didn't say who they were, and I didn't ask, because something told me the answer wouldn't make me feel better. By the third night, the pump station felt less like a workplace and more like a thin line someone had drawn in the sand and dared the water to cross. Keller didn't leave right away this time. He lingered in the office, pretending to review paperwork while he watched the shoreline through the window like he was memorizing it. When I asked if the shutdown was confirmed, he shook his head. "They're deciding," he said. "Depends on whether the boundary holds." I asked what boundary he meant. He looked at me for a long second, then folded the logbook closed. "The one we're standing on." He left without another word. The fog came in early again, rolling over the reclaimed land until the fence lights were swallowed into dull, floating orbs. I did my first patrol slower than usual, every step measured, the crunch of gravel under my boots giving way to a softer, wetter sound as I got closer to the fence. The ground there had changed. What used to be compacted dirt was now spongy, giving under my weight, water seeping up around my soles. The water line was no longer a line at all. It was a broad, uneven edge that pulsed gently, advancing and retreating in short, irregular motions that didn't match any tide pattern I'd ever seen. I logged it and went back inside, my hands already shaking. Around 9, the cameras started acting up again, but differently this time. Instead of flickering, they lagged, like the feed was a second behind reality. I'd watch the water on the monitor creep forward, then hear it slap against the fence outside a moment later, the sound catching up to the image. The pumps groaned, their rhythm faltering, and a low-pressure warning blinked on one panel before clearing itself. No alarms, no faults, just strain. I sat there listening to the machinery fight against something it was never designed to push back. Just before 11, the sound from the water changed. It wasn't subtle anymore. Something large shifted beyond the fence, displacing water in a way that made the floodlights shimmer. I leaned closer to the monitor despite myself. Beneath the surface, that same elongated shape moved again, slower now, closer to the fence line. It stopped directly opposite the office window. The water bulged upward slightly, as if whatever was under there was rising just enough to test the space. I felt the urge to stand, to go outside and see it with my own eyes, strong enough that my chair scraped loudly against the floor before I caught myself. Rule 4 burned in my head. Do not respond to sounds coming from the water. I sat back down, fists clenched, and stared at the wall until the urge passed. That's when I heard the voice. Not through the radio, not through the pumps, but from outside, muffled by fog and distance, coming from the direction of the water line. It sounded like a man trying to speak calmly, choosing his words carefully. "Hey," it said. "Security." My blood ran cold. It used the word the way Keller had, flat and professional. "I need you to come take a look at this," the voice continued. "Something's wrong with the intake." I knew immediately that it wasn't real. No one else was scheduled. No one could have gotten past the access road without me seeing headlights. Still, my body reacted like it always had to authority and routine. I stood halfway out of my chair before forcing myself back down. "Ignore it," I whispered to myself, even though the rules never said anything about voices pretending to be staff. The voice waited. Then it tried again, closer this time, the fog carrying it cleanly. "Marcus," it said. Hearing my name almost broke me. I hadn't told Keller my full name. It shouldn't have known it. I pressed my palms flat on the desk and stared at the logbook, at the neat rows of timestamps and notes that suddenly felt like a paper shield against something much larger. "You need to see this," the voice said, irritation creeping in now, the calm slipping. "The waterline's not where it's supposed to be." Outside, metal creaked. The fence shuddered slightly as something leaned against it, not hard enough to bend it, just enough to feel the resistance. On the camera, I watched the water swell and retreat in time with the pressure. The shape beneath the surface rose higher, its outline briefly visible as a darker mass just under the floodlight's reach. For a split second, I thought I saw a suggestion of features, not a face exactly, but an arrangement that implied one, oriented toward the office, toward me. The pumps surged, alarms flaring red across multiple panels at once. Pressure warnings screamed, lights flashing so fast they blurred together. And then just as suddenly everything stopped. The alarms cut out. The pump settled into an uneasy idle. The voice outside went silent. I stayed frozen in my chair for a long time, listening to my own breathing, to the faint lap of water against metal. When I finally checked the cameras again, the waterline had jumped forward another several feet. The fence was standing in water now, the lower links submerged, currents swirling lazily through them like fingers through hair. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When it did, it revealed a station under siege. The reclaimed land was gone, swallowed by dark water that stretched all the way to the fence on three sides. Only the access road remained dry, a narrow strip of gravel cutting through a shallow, reflective expanse. Keller arrived just after sunrise, took one look and swore under his breath. "They're shutting it down," he said, "effective immediately." I asked what would happen if the water kept moving. He didn't answer. He just looked out at the floodplain, at the way the water seemed to press closer even as he watched, and said, "This place was never meant to hold it forever." Shutdown didn't mean quiet, it meant waiting, and that turned out to be worse. Keller stayed on site after the order came down, pacing the office with his phone pressed to his ear, arguing in low tones with people who never raised their voices back. I caught fragments: containment window, acceptable loss, do not escalate, phrases that sounded like they belonged to reports, not to place where the water was actively trying to erase the ground under our feet. The plan, such as it was, involved keeping the pumps running at reduced capacity until a recovery team arrived sometime after dark, a team Keller wouldn't describe beyond saying they were specialized. Until then, I was to remain on duty. "We can't leave the site unattended," he said, like that explained anything. By late afternoon, the fog thinned enough to show the damage clearly. The fence stood in knee-deep water along most of the perimeter, the access road now a narrow causeway with water creeping closer on both sides. The reeds beyond it lay flattened, pressed down in long arcs that suggested something had moved through them repeatedly, back and forth, patient. I walked the inside of the fence one last time in daylight, logging what I could see, my boots splashing with each step. The waterline wasn't a line anymore. It was a presence, occupying space, testing edges. I kept catching myself glancing toward the intake channels, half expecting to see something rise up and claim the pumps outright. Keller watched me from the office window, his expression tight. "After dark," he said when I came back in. "You don't go outside unless I say so." He slid another sheet across the desk, handwritten this time. "Temporary protocols: lock doors at dusk, kill non-essential lights. If the pumps alarm, observe only. If voices occur, record time and content, do not answer." There was a final line at the bottom, pressed hard enough to tear the paper slightly: "If the water crosses the threshold, evacuate immediately." I asked what threshold meant. Keller didn't answer. Sunset came and went behind a wall of gray. Fog rolled in thicker than before, swallowing the fence lights until they were just dull glows floating in nothing. We killed half the floodlights, plunging the outer yard into shadow. Inside, the office felt smaller, the hum of the pumps louder, like they were trapped with us. We sat in silence for a while, listening. Around 9, the water reached the edge of the access road. On the camera feed, I watched the gravel darken as it soaked through, puddles forming in the low spots. "It's not supposed to do that," I muttered. Keller nodded once. "It isn't following the charts," he said. "It never does." At 9:32, the first voice came back. Not shouting, not calling for help, just talking, conversational, drifting up from the waterline like someone standing just out of sight. "Pressure S off," it said. "You can come check it now." Keller stiffened beside me. The voice was his. Same cadence, same clipped phrasing. "Don't," he whispered, not to the voice but to me, as if he could feel the way my body leaned forward despite everything I knew. The voice waited, then continued, a note of irritation creeping in. "We don't have all night." On the monitor, the water surged against the fence again, a gentle push that made the metal creak. Keller reached for the recorder, hands shaking just enough to be noticeable, and hit record. "Timestamp," he said under his breath. "Log it." The voice changed tactics after that. It softened, lost the authority. "Hey," it said, "it's fine, you're doing fine, just step out and look." The words slid right into my head, familiar, comforting, the kind of encouragement you hear on a job when something's gone sideways but manageable. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. "It's lying," I said, mostly to myself. Keller nodded again, jaw tight. "It always does." At 10, the pumps alarmed across 3 systems simultaneously. Red lights strobed, warning tones overlapping until the sound was almost physical. I checked the readouts, heart racing. No surge, no spike. The alarm shouldn't have been possible. Keller swore and killed the audio, leaving only the lights. On the camera, the waterline jumped forward again, a sudden redraw that erased the last dry strip along the fence. The lower half of the chain link disappeared beneath dark water, currents threading through it. Something moved just under the surface, close enough that the floodlights revealed a smooth rise and fall, like a back breaking the skin of the water and sinking again. "That's it," Keller said hoarsely. "That's the threshold." The voice outside laughed then, a low, wet sound that didn't come from a throat so much as from the water itself, amplified by fog and metal. "You're late," it said. The office door shuddered as water slapped against the concrete outside, the level rising fast now, no longer patient. Keller grabbed his bag and tossed it at me. "Keys are in the truck," he said. "We leave now." We stepped into the access corridor, boots splashing immediately, the water already ankle-deep. The fog pressed in close, reducing the world to a few feet of gray. Behind us, the pumps screamed as systems failed one by one, the alarms we'd muted inside now audible through the walls, panicked. As we moved toward the access road, something brushed the fence beside us, not violently, just present, and I felt the pressure of it through the metal, a weight that didn't care about barriers anymore. The voice followed us, staying just out of sight. "You can still stay," it said, coaxing. "We can keep it where it is." Keller didn't respond. We reached the truck as the water surged again, climbing up the road behind us, cutting off the path back to the station. Keller fumbled the keys once, cursed, then got the door open. We piled in, engine roaring to life, headlights punching weakly through fog. As we sped down the road, I looked in the side mirror and saw the pump station lights flicker and go dark one by one, swallowed by fog and rising water, the boundary finally gone. The last thing I saw before the road curved away was the water smoothing out, calm and reflective, like it had always belonged there. 6 months later, the pump station officially doesn't exist, at least not in any database I still have access to, and the stretch of coastline where it sat has been reclassified as an unstable tidal zone with restricted access, which is bureaucratic language for "we're not going to fix this, and we don't want witnesses." Keller vanished a week after the shutdown. I tried calling him twice, then drove past the address he'd listed on his employment paperwork, only to find a house with a different name on the mailbox, and a woman who swore no one by that name had ever lived there. My final paycheck came through without issue, marked complete contract termination, and that was that. No follow-up, no statement, no one asking why 2 people abandoned a critical flood facility in the middle of the night. I kept working security for a while after that, inland sites, warehouses, data centers, anywhere far from open water, but it didn't help the way I thought it would. Once you've watched a boundary fail in real time, once you've seen how easily lines can be redrawn, distance stops meaning safety. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How puddles lingered longer than they should after rain, how storm drains gurgled like they were breathing, How the sound of water moving through pipes could almost, if you weren't careful, be mistaken for speech. I pulled the incident reports I'd kept copies of, the logs with their neat timestamps and notes about the water line moving closer, and tried to make sense of them as data, as anomalies that could be graphed and explained. That fell apart when I noticed something I'd missed the first dozen times I read them. The jumps in the waterline weren't random. They happened at consistent intervals, not tied to tides or weather but to observation. The longer I stayed inside watching the cameras, the faster the boundary advanced. The nights when I forced myself to stop looking, to keep my eyes on paperwork or the wall, the movement slowed. It wasn't reacting to pressure or flow. It was reacting to attention. That realization sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I did some digging after that, careful, indirect, looking for mentions of pump stations, flood control failures, reclaimed land quietly surrendered back to the sea. There were more than I expected. Different states, different agencies, same language. Erosion event, structural compromise, early decommissioning. In one leaked environmental memo, I found a phrase that made my stomach drop: managed retreat with passive deterrence failure. No explanation attached, just that phrase repeated. I stopped sleeping through the night. When I did sleep, I dreamed of standing behind a fence watching water creep closer, feeling that same pull to step out and check it myself, to verify, to understand. In the dreams, the fence was always just a little too low. I woke up every time just before it was overtopped, heart racing, sheets damp with sweat. 2 months ago, during a routine overnight shift at an inland distribution hub, a fire suppression pipe burst unexpectedly, flooding one corner of the building. I was first on scene, standing there with a flashlight watching water spread across concrete that should have been bone dry. For a split second, I felt it again. That instinct to wait, to see how far it would go, to let it show me the new boundary. I shut the valve and called it in immediately, hands shaking afterward. Report classified it as a mechanical failure. No one questioned why I'd looked shaken. Last week, I got an email from an address that didn't resolve to any domain, just a string of numbers. No subject line. The body contained a single sentence: boundary awareness is appreciated. There was no signature. I deleted it, emptied the trash, powered my phone off for an hour, but the damage was done. Because reading it made something click into place. The pump station hadn't been there to keep the water out. It had been there to show it where to stop, to give it a reference point. When the station failed, when the pumps went silent and the fence disappeared beneath the surface, the water didn't surge inland catastrophically. It settled, like it had achieved what it came for. I don't work night security anymore. I took a job that keeps me moving during daylight, inspecting equipment, filling out reports that don't involve standing still and watching boundaries. Even so, I still find myself pausing near bodies of water, counting how many steps away I am, noting where the edge should be. I never step closer to check. I never test it. Because the thing I understand now, the thing that keeps me up at night, is that the water doesn't need to rush. It doesn't need to break through all at once. It only needs someone willing to keep an eye on it, someone paid to watch and record and verify, until the line moves far enough that no one can remember where it used to be. And the worst part is knowing there are still pump stations out there, still fences, still people like me being told to log the changes and not ask questions, standing alone at night while the water line keeps moving closer, patient and attentive, waiting to see who's watching.